Hey guys, tonight we drift into 1692 Salem, where the air smells like smoke and superstition, and where your neighbors might accuse you of sorcery just because your cow gave less milk than usual. The trees loom like gossiping villagers, branches crooked as arthritic fingers, pointing blame. Horses clomp through muddy paths beside clapboard houses, and you can practically hear the paranoia crackling like kindling in a hearth. You're going to hear stories of twitching girls, dusty ministers, and trials where invisible ghosts give witness testimony. You'll hear how people really believed their dreams could convict a woman to death, and why some of them still defend it. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this if you value logic and due process. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. Extra points if your cat's watching too. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're stepping into Salem Village, not to be confused with Salem Town, because colonial Massachusetts apparently needed two places with the same name to make things more confusing. It's late winter, 1692. You're trudging through slush in your uncomfortable wool socks, and everyone's on edge because the devil is supposedly running errands in Essex County. The village is only a few decades old, and already it's bubbling with resentment. People squabble over land boundaries, church appointments, and whether or not someone's pig is possessed. The community's like one big group chat where no one can leave, and everyone's subtweeting in sermon form. Oh, and you're also legally required to go to church. So good luck dodging that Sunday hangout. By candlelight, your neighbors read the Bible, interpret the weather as a personal message from God, and whisper about how that woman down the road who owns property is definitely a servant of Satan. You'd think a world lit only by fire would be calmer, but nope, everything flickers and flares, even the rumors. In this atmosphere of tight collars and tighter minds, religious leaders hold as much power as local lords, and they're all steeped in Puritan theology, an ultra-strict branch of Protestantism that believes most people are damned anyway. But maybe, if you're very, very good, God won't hate you quite as much. Charming, right? Now toss in some recent trauma, smallpox epidemics, famines, and raids from neighboring indigenous tribes who, understandably, aren't thrilled about colonists invading their land. People are scared, raw, and one weird event away from full-blown freak-out mode. And wouldn't you know it, that weird event is about to knock on the front door of the Reverend Samuel Parris. Parris isn't exactly winning hearts and minds in Salem. He's the kind of guy who would scold you for smiling on the Sabbath. He's newish to the village, a former sugar plantation manager in Barbados. So basically, he went from tropical oppression to frozen puritanical drama. Not exactly a glow-up. He's also a man with enemies. Many villagers resent that he insists on ownership of the parsonage and a higher salary. And he doesn't help matters by being, well, kind of a jerk. You know the type, the guy who says grace at dinner and still manages to make it sound like a threat. But the real chaos starts not with Parris himself, but with his daughter Betty and niece Abigail Williams. One chilly evening, they begin to act strangely. Not ate too much sugar, strange. More like writhing on the floor, shrieking random Bible verses, and crawling under furniture, strange. At first, it's kind of funny. Kids being kids. Then they start throwing things, barking like dogs, and insisting invisible spirits are attacking them. Less funny. People gather around. They're praying, fasting, hoping the girls are just emotionally expressive. But the fits don't stop. And when more girls join in, Ann Putnam Jr., Mercy Lewis, Mary Walcott, it's no longer an isolated case. It's an outbreak, not of disease, but of full-blown supernatural suspicion. Now here's your historical fact. This outbreak of afflicted girls was the spark that lit the entire Salem witch trials. It wasn't adult politicians or devil-worshipping cults. It was a group of teenagers. Yes, really. Sometimes, history is basically the worst high school group project ever. And here's the quirky tidbit. One theory suggests the girls might have been bored. That's right, boredom. No TikTok, no mall, no hobbies besides embroidering scripture. Some historians even argue they started role-playing witch accusations like kids might stage a haunted house. And then it all went off the rails. Historians still argue whether this initial episode was real illness, demonic possession, mass hysteria, or just performance art gone rogue. One idea, the ergot poisoning theory, suggests that the girls may have consumed moldy rye infected with a fungus that mimics LSD. Think kale salad, but make it psychedelic. That theory's not widely accepted now, but it lingers like a musky spice rack of maybe. Meanwhile, the community is panicking, because if these sweet, God-fearing girls are under attack, it must be witches, real ones, invisible, vengeful, possibly flying around on things witches. It's always easier to blame a person than admit your town might just need therapy and fiber. And you, standing in the shadows near the fireplace, you feel the tension buzzing in your molars. You know this won't end well. It never does. In places where reason is the first casualty, and fear gets elected judge. Outside, the wind howls through bare trees. Inside, someone whispers a name, a woman's name. It begins. You don't even notice the shift at first. It's just a whisper, a name, almost tossed like a twig into a bonfire. But twigs catch fire fast, and this one roars before the night's over. Tituba. She's Reverend Paris's enslaved servant, brought with him from Barbados. And she's different, foreign, dark-skinned, with a lilting accent and a way of speaking that doesn't match the Puritan mold. You watch the crowd stiffen when her name is spoken. All the uneasiness swirling in the room seems to latch on to her, like dust to cobwebs. Abigail and Betty accuse her first, of course. They say she bewitches them, that she flies on broomsticks, conjures animals, and signs the devil's black book. It's wild stuff, the kind that sounds like bad fan fiction, until you remember the people around you believe it. Really, truly, believe it. They don't roll their eyes. They clutch their Bibles tighter. And what does Tituba do? She confesses. Not just a vague, yes, okay, maybe I hexed the cat kind of confession, no. She spins a tale so dramatic, it could sell out a Netflix special. She describes a world of witches, devils, and shadowy figures. talks about flying through the night, about red cats and wolves in cloaks. She names names, and suddenly, the invisible enemy becomes flesh and blood. Here's your mainstream fact. Tituba was the first to confess to witchcraft in Salem, and her testimony cracked open the floodgates. Once she pointed fingers, the idea of a grand conspiracy of witches became not just possible, but terrifyingly believable. Now, this confession, why did she do it? That's where things get murky. Historians still argue whether Tituba was coerced, beaten into talking, or whether she played along to survive. After all, people who confessed weren't executed. People who denied it were. Here's your quirky tidbit. In her confession, Tituba mentions seeing a man, all black, with a high-crowned hat, who made her sign a book. Many scholars later pointed out how eerily this resembles descriptions of Puritan ministers themselves. So, was she describing the devil, or just a really judgy guy from church? And soon, others are swept in. 2 more women are accused, right away. Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne. You've probably never met a Sarah who's terrifying, but in 1692, these two fit the bill. According to the villagers, at least. Sarah Good is poor, abrasive, and often mutters to herself. Basically, the human version of a broken shopping cart wheel. She's homeless and probably mentally ill, but that just makes her more suspicious to people who equate poverty with sin. Sarah Osborne, on the other hand, is scandalous for entirely different reasons. She married her indentured servant and hasn't been to church in a while. Truly, how dare she? So now, there are 3 women in custody, all accused of cavorting with the devil. 1 enslaved, 1 impoverished, and 1 socially inappropriate. If there were a Venn diagram of people Salem liked to blame, they'd all be dead center. The villagers can't look away. Every twitch, every scream from the afflicted girls is more theatrical than the last. They throw fits on cue. They claim to see ghostly figures, to feel bites and scratches from unseen claws. It becomes a kind of performance, an interpretive dance of doom that no one questions, because to question the girls is to question their virtue. And Puritans, they love virtue, almost as much as they love accusing people of lacking it. Soon, the local magistrates, John Hathorne and Jonathan Corwin, step in. They aren't exactly CSI, Salem, but they do have a flair for drama. They interrogate the accused in public, often badgering them into confessions. Imagine being asked a question like, "Are you a witch?" and being shouted over if you say, "No." That's the kind of logic we're dealing with here. Now, you're probably wondering why adults are taking all of this so seriously. Can't someone just say, "Hey, this sounds kind of fake"? But in 1692, people aren't thinking in terms of psychology or social pressure. They think Satan is real, lurking in the woods, and maybe even in the pantry. You know, right behind the salted cod. The idea of the invisible world isn't fantasy to them. It's truth. And these girls, they're seen as victims, not villains. So their every word is treated like scripture. If they say Sarah Good's specter pinched them, well, then clearly her soul floated out of her body and did a little demon jazz hands. And if you were there, you wouldn't speak up either, because people who defend the accused tend to become the next accused. It's like a very twisted version of jury duty, but with more gallows and fewer coffee breaks. The village transforms. Suddenly, everyone's watching everyone else. Did your neighbor mutter something under her breath? Which? Did someone's butter curdle? Which? Did you trip on a root? Which planted it? Paranoia spreads faster than a cold in a kindergarten. People begin listing grievances they've nursed for years. Boundary disputes, bad debts, slights at the market. Old beef gets served hot and labeled as demonic. And you, dear listener, are trying to stay out of it. You keep your head down, say your prayers, and maybe don't make eye contact with anyone under the age of 14. The girls are now minor celebrities, their behavior escalating like a soap opera with too many plot lines. One of them claims she was choked by a specter during dinner. Another falls stiff as a board in church, eyes rolled back like a possessed raccoon. One odd detail: the girls tend to have these fits most often when certain adults are nearby. You know, the ones already suspected of witchcraft. Coincidence? Or are they just really good at targeted theatrics? The worst part is, no one knows how to stop it. There's no off switch for hysteria once the crowd's riled up. Even the skeptics keep quiet, whispering their doubts only in locked rooms, or to their livestock, who are much better at keeping secrets. At night, you try to sleep with the sound of wind scraping across wooden shutters. Every creak makes you wonder if it's just the house settling or something darker, something spectral. You don't believe in witches, but you definitely believe in mobs. And this one's just getting warmed up. By now, the village feels less like a town and more like a stage set for a very slow, deeply uncomfortable horror play. Except the actors don't know it's a play, and the audience is armed with pitchforks and sermon notes. The afflicted girls, now a full troupe of melodrama, are holding the room hostage every time someone walks in. People barely breathe. If someone's toe twitches wrong, a girl shrieks and throws herself to the ground, like she's in a very intense improv class. If your cloak brushes her shoulder, that's obviously a hex. It's time to call in someone who's really going to ground this madness in reason and science, right? Enter William Griggs, Salem Village's local doctor. Now, calling him a doctor might be generous. He has no formal training, but he's the best they've got, and he's basically Google in human form for 1692. You know, if Google had 3 books, one of which is just the Bible, he examines the girls, watches them twist and scream, and, without blinking, declares they are under an evil hand. Boom. Medical opinion delivered. Witchcraft diagnosis confirmed. Here's your mainstream fact. Griggs was indeed the first authority to declare the afflicted girl's behavior unnatural, jump-starting the trials with a pseudoscientific seal of approval. His vague but ominous diagnosis gave fuel to religious leaders and judges who wanted to take action. Because once someone in a wig says it's real, it's game on. Now you're sitting there thinking, what even is evil hand? Excellent question. It's basically 17th century code for I have no idea, but it sounds spooky. It's also incredibly useful, for blaming just about anything weird: nosebleeds, bad dreams, stubbed toes, on the devil. The thing is, Griggs's declaration shifts everything. It takes the situation from hysterical girls playing pranks to spiritual warfare. And once that switch flips, logic packs its bags and takes a long sabbatical. So now, instead of seeking medical causes or psychological explanations, the villagers lean even harder into supernatural paranoia. Enter the ministers. They descend like vultures with embroidered collars, full of fire and brimstone sermons and very little chill. You attend a gathering where the ministers speak. It's not comforting. It's more of a group anxiety session with bonus Latin. Everyone is reminded that Satan is real, that witches walk among them, and that even the innocent can be tricked by dark forces. So, good luck sleeping. Historians still argue whether Griggs actually believed in his own diagnosis or just wanted to keep his place in the village's fragile social order. Some say he genuinely thought he was helping. Others think he was saving his own skin, because if the devil was real, then doing nothing would make him suspicious, and nobody wants to be the next Sarah Good. Now, let's sprinkle in something weird. In some accounts, Griggs also gave the afflicted girls treatments like herbal brews, bleedings, and purging. You know, just casually poisoning teenagers to remove the demons. It was like a spa day in hell. And here comes your quirky tidbit. One remedy Griggs reportedly suggested involved placing the afflicted girl's urine in a cake made with rye meal, then feeding it to a dog. If the dog acted possessed, it confirmed witchcraft. You might be asking, why a dog? Because apparently, dogs are great judges of demonic energy. Also, it was 1692, and no one had hobbies. This kind of diagnosis blends folk magic and religious belief into a very uneasy soup, one that somehow passes as justice. You can't quite wrap your head around it, but no one else seems confused. You stare at the dog, who just wants to go sniff a rock, and you think, this is the guy making legal decisions now? Meanwhile, more names are being spoken in whispers that grow louder by the hour. People are called to testify, to remember old slights, to suddenly claim that 10 years ago, someone gave them the evil eye after a harvest failed. It's like watching a social avalanche where grudges snowball into murder trials. You see neighbors hesitate. Should they accuse someone? If they do, maybe they'll look pious, holy, protected. If they don't, suspicious. And all the while, the girls keep performing. One grabs her throat mid-sermon and says a witch is choking her. Another faints when someone merely walks past. These are not subtle accusations. They're full-blown spiritual fireworks. But here's a strange irony. The more dramatic the girls get, the more they're believed. You'd think at some point someone would say, hey, maybe this is a bit much? But no, they're treated like seers, victims, prophets. One girl, Ann Putnam Jr., is particularly active. She's from a prominent family with deep feuds in the village. Suddenly, many of the people she accuses are those her family has legal disputes with. Coincidence? You tell me. You hear stories of spectral evidence where someone claims to see your ghostly form doing bad things. Even if your physical body is in bed snoring, that's enough to indict you. Imagine waking up and learning your astral projection committed a felony in your sleep. No alibi can save you. It's like getting a parking ticket from a dream. Even worse, the afflicted girls sometimes say the witches tell them secrets, horrible ones, about other people's sins, real or imagined. These secrets fuel more accusations. Soon, the village becomes a tangled web of paranoia, whispered confessions, and theological finger pointing. And you? You stay quiet, you go to church, nod solemnly, and maybe double knot your shoelaces just in case someone thinks a tripping hazard is witchcraft. At night, the doctor's words echo, evil hand. The idea that someone, anyone, might be touching your life from beyond, bending your will, curdling your milk, making your dreams into evidence. You try to sleep, but your dreams are cluttered with whispering judges, barking dogs, and the eerie certainty that one false word could land you in the stocks. The doctor may have just scribbled some words onto the air, but they've become gospel, and now the whole village is writing its own version of hell. One accusation at a time. You wake to the sound of voices, muted but sharp-edged. It's another gathering, another examination. The trials are becoming a regular fixture now, like market days, but with more crying and fewer turnips. The meeting house is packed again. People are squinting in that particular way that says, I hope you're not a witch, but I'm definitely watching you. Today's accused, Rebecca Nurse. This one hits different. She's not like the others. She's not poor, not enslaved, not a social pariah. She's 71, devout, deeply respected, a grandma, basically. If your grandma had 11 kids and a reputation for being the moral backbone of the neighborhood, so when the afflicted girls start screaming at the sight of her, twisting in agony and crying that her specter is tormenting them, you can feel the air change. People shift in their seats. Doubt creeps in just for a second, like a moth in the corner of your eye. Rebecca Nurse. Her? Here's your mainstream fact. Rebecca Nurse was a well-respected elderly woman whose accusation shook Salem village. Her arrest marked a turning point in the trials. If someone like her could be accused, then no one was safe. You watch her stand before the court, shaky but proud, declaring her innocence with a calm dignity that cuts through the room like a knife. And for a moment, even the judges seem unsure. There's a silence, a pause, a ripple of second guessing. But then the girls shriek again. One clutches her chest. Another points and cries, "She's biting me!" The illusion holds. Rebecca is indicted, she's sent to prison, and you see her disappear down the road. A small, dignified figure, surrounded by armed men. Historians still argue whether her arrest was politically motivated. The Nurse family had long-standing disputes with the Putnams, whose daughter Anne was among the most dramatic of the afflicted. Was this justice, or just old-fashioned vengeance dressed in a petticoat? Here's a quirky tidbit. During her examination, Rebecca was so hard of hearing, she misheard a question and accidentally gave what sounded like a damning answer. The court took this as a confession. You think your autocorrect is bad? Try 17th century legal hearings with no hearing aids. The absurdity grows. More people are dragged in. Martha Corey, who dared to say publicly that the girls might be faking. That's basically waving a red flag at a Puritan bull. Within days, she's accused too. You sit through her trial. She raises her eyebrows and crosses her arms, modern sarcasm in a starched bonnet. She asks the court how a person's invisible ghost can cause harm, and you think, finally, someone with common sense. But the girls seize up like broken marionettes the moment she speaks. Logic, as usual, is no match for theatrics. Martha's husband, Giles Corey, tries to defend her. Bad idea. Soon enough, he's accused too. Guilt by association, especially if you happen to be married to a skeptical woman. And now, things start snowballing. Court records overflow. Warrants are written like grocery lists. You see names that don't surprise you, and a few that chill you. Even children are accused. Little Dorothy Good, just 4 years old, is imprisoned. Her confession, probably just trying to say something, anything, to stop the shouting adults. You imagine her clutching her doll in a cold cell while someone tries to ask if the devil ever offered her candy. You walk the village streets, and it's like everyone's auditioning for sainthood. People pray louder, walk straighter, and snitch faster. I saw her with a black cat. He mumbled something weird near the well. She looked at my baby, and it cried. It's exhausting. Every interaction is a minefield. You can't roll your eyes without someone thinking you're casting a minor curse. And then comes the big shift. Governor Phipps, who's been off organizing a war in Maine, because of course there's a war, because why not, finally returns to Massachusetts. He finds the colony mid-meltdown. Trials are clogging the courts. Jails are overflowing. The mood is less Christian utopia and more nightmare on Puritan Street. To try and regain control, Phipps sets up a special court, the Court of Oyer and Terminer, which is fancy old English for to hear and determine. It's based in Salem town, not the village, but it means things are about to get a whole lot more official and deadly. Mainstream fact incoming. This court is what allowed for the formal trials that led to most of the executions. Presided over by Judge William Stoughton, it accepted spectral evidence, claims of ghostly visions, as actual proof. Yes, your nightmare is now legally binding. The first case, Bridget Bishop. She's already been accused before, and her lifestyle, bright clothes, loud personality, and a fondness for alehouses, makes her a perfect target. She doesn't go down quietly. She scoffs, argues, glares, and none of it helps. Bridget Bishop becomes the first to be hanged on June 10th, 1692. You hear the town bell toll. The gallows are hastily constructed, the rope thick and scratchy, and the silence after her death is louder than the screaming that led to it. The moment she's executed, the dam breaks. It's no longer about investigations or trials. It's about purging, about cleaning house. Warrants fly like confetti. The town square turns into an accusation carnival, and you realize, deep down, that things are never going back to the way they were. There's a phrase passed around now. Better that 10 suspected witches should escape than one innocent person be condemned. Sounds noble, right? Well, Salem's doing the opposite of that. They're catching 10 and executing them just to be safe. Because what if they're real? What if the devil is sneaking in through the milk churn? And just like that, your nights are haunted not by witches, but by the faces of your neighbors, accused and shackled. You hear sobs through the prison walls. You hear the thud of the executioner's boots, and every time someone knocks at your door, your heart leaps into your throat. This is no longer about religion or justice, it's survival. And the people you once chatted with over garden fences are being walked to the gallows by torchlight. You don't remember when you stopped sleeping well. Maybe it was after Bridget Bishop's hanging, or maybe it was when the second, third, fourth bodies swung from the gallows. All you know is that the night is full of creaks and whispers now, and even your dreams wear bonnets and accuse you of sorcery. The court of Oye and Terminer is in full swing, and it's swinging hard. Its judges, especially William Stoughton, aren't interested in subtleties. They hear accusations, accept spectral evidence, nod solemnly, and sentence. It's like a bureaucratic meat grinder where facts go in and fear comes out. You find yourself back in the courtroom, again, crammed in with your neighbors, shoulders pressed together, breath held. Someone is on trial. Again. But now, the rhythm is faster, like a factory line. Today's spectacle? Sarah Good, the same beggar woman you remember from before. Stringy hair, torn clothes, muttering to herself as she once wandered the road. Her poverty made her a walking target from the start. She fits the storybook idea of a witch, and so, conveniently, she becomes one. Her trial is painful to watch. The girls flail and scream with renewed drama every time she lifts her eyes. "She's biting me," one yells. "She's flying," another cries. You squint. She's very much not flying. She's exhausted, dirty, pregnant. Here's your mainstream fact. Sarah Good was one of the first 3 women accused, and she was executed on July 19th, 1692. She famously cursed her executioner just before being hanged, telling him, "I am no more a witch than you are a wizard, and if you take away my life, God will give you blood to drink." Later, that man allegedly died choking on his own blood. Cheerful stuff, huh? And here's a quirky tidbit. Sarah's young daughter, Dorothy, remember her, was forced to testify against her. Just 5 years old, and already caught in a mess of adult lies, coerced stories, and terrified yeses. It's believed she repeated what she was told, confused and frightened, still clutching her little rag doll. But today isn't just about Sarah Good. There are multiple people on trial. Elizabeth Howe, Susanna Martin, Sarah Wilds, Rebecca Nurse, all accused and sentenced to death, all in a single session. It's like the judges are speed-running justice. You glance at the townspeople. Some look smug, satisfied. Others look hollow. There's this quiet, collective grimness hanging over everyone, like a wet woolen blanket. Because even the ones clapping, the loudest, know, deep down, that truth isn't really the point anymore. It's about the show, the confession, the punishment. Still, nobody stops the train, because who wants to stand on the tracks? One of the strangest things about this whole mess is how confession works. You'd think admitting to being a witch would seal your fate. But no, it actually saves you. Deny, and you die. Confess, and you might live. Might. The Puritans believe confession is a step toward repentance, so you're more useful alive. You can be interrogated, studied, propped up as proof that the devil is here. Historians still argue whether people who confessed truly believed they were guilty or whether they were just terrified and calculating their odds. It's hard to blame them either way. You picture the scene: cold jail, rotting food, children taken away, friends turning their backs. You'd say anything too. You hear about George Burroughs, a former minister, being accused next. Yes, a minister. The girls claim his ghost chokes them in bed, that he can recite scripture perfectly without faltering, a trick no true witch should be able to do. His real crime, probably that he criticized the way Salem's leaders handled their business. And here comes your quirky moment. When Burroughs is hanged, he delivers the Lord's Prayer flawlessly. The crowd gasps. That was supposed to be impossible for a witch. Some people murmur. For the first time, real doubt flickers. But the execution continues anyway, because the rope doesn't care about scripture. You catch wind of other cases too, bizarre to make up. A man dreams of a black man whispering secrets in his ear, so he testifies in court the next day that this spirit belonged to one of the accused. Another person claims a shape-shifting pig tried to sit on her chest while she slept, sent by a local widow. Spectral pigs, demon dogs, flying witches. It's not a courtroom anymore. It's a Halloween special with real consequences. Still, people are being pressed to testify. Pressed, literally, in the case of Giles Corey, the husband of Martha Corey. When he refuses to plead guilty or innocent, they crush him under heavy stones. It's meant to force a confession. He says nothing, just 2 words, more weight, and dies. You stand at a distance, listening to the story pass from house to house. There's horror in people's eyes, but also something else: admiration. The man said no. The man made his refusal louder than all their shouting. Of course, that doesn't stop anything. Giles is dead. His land is forfeited. The courts continue. But now, a seed of resistance is planted. The spectrum of accusations keeps growing. If someone confessed, they were sometimes forced to name others, whether they knew any witches or not. Name 10 more. The judge says, "We'll let you live." So, people do. They invent names, or they give real ones. Some even accuse the dead, which, honestly, seems like the safest move. So you start avoiding people. You stop asking questions. You go to church, smile politely, nod during sermons, and say as little as possible, because there's something in the air now, worse than the devil, maybe. A kind of hunger. The town wants this drama. It feeds on it, like they're baking fear into their daily bread. And yet, through all the chaos, you find odd moments of stillness. A tree swaying over the meeting house, a candle flickering beside a list of names. You wonder how many people in town are lying, awake, staring at the ceiling, hearts pounding, wondering if they're next. Because at this point, it's not about what you've done, it's about what people say you've done. And once the whispers start, there's no real way back. The gallows keep creaking. The ink keeps drying on more warrants. And somehow, it's starting to feel normal. By now, the town square has the same ambiance as a courtroom execution hybrid. And the noose is almost a civic mascot. You walk through Salem Village and can't tell whether you're in a religious colony or a very grim theater troupe. Except here, the curtain never comes down. It just gets tighter. You pause in front of the jailhouse. Behind those thick wooden walls, over 150 people are crammed into damp, stinking cells. Old women, teenagers, farmers, ministers, even some of the very same accusers start feeling the heat when their drama doesn't land quite right. It's less about proof and more about vibes now. Accusation by mood. This is the peak of the hysteria. 19 people have been hanged, 1 pressed to death. A few die in prison, probably from malnutrition, exposure, and just plain hopelessness. Others, surprisingly, survive, lingering in their cells for months. Here's your mainstream fact. The peak of the Salem witch trials came in the summer of 1692, with mass executions and new accusations pouring in nearly every day. At its worst, nearly 1 in 20 adults in Essex County was accused. You hear names floated in whispers, some of them disturbingly familiar. Your neighbor who kept to herself, the midwife who helped deliver half the town, a man who muttered something about taxes under his breath that one time. Poof, sorcery. And here's your quirky tidbit. One man claimed he saw a witch fly up to his window and bite him, leaving visible teeth marks. The problem? His evidence turned out to be a rash from wool. Historians still laugh at the idea of aerial sheep-induced curses. Still, historians argue whether the trials spiraled because of legitimate fear or because people realized they could use the system to settle scores. Some say the paranoia was like a virus. Others believe the entire court had become a tool for petty vendettas in Puritan clothing. And oh boy, do those vendettas keep coming. There's the case of Mary Easty, sister of Rebecca Nurse. After being accused, she's imprisoned, then surprisingly released when the hysteria briefly dips. You think maybe things are turning around. Maybe reason is tiptoeing back into the room. But no, the girls claim she's attacking them again. So she's rearrested. She writes one of the most eloquent and heart-wrenching petitions to the court, pleading not for herself, but for future victims. Basically, even if you kill me, please stop killing innocent people after me. You'd think that would melt a few judge hearts. It doesn't. She's hanged. By now, the executions are public events. You stand at the edges of the crowd, watching the condemned carted up Gallows Hill. Their hands are tied. Their expressions range from terrified to oddly calm. The crowd is a mixed bag, some crying, others smugly righteous, and a few just there because it's the only show in town. A noose, a prayer, a drop. Repeat. You overhear 2 farmers discussing the latest hanging like it's a weather report. Cloudy with a chance of damnation. Then they go back to arguing about livestock. Human life feels weirdly cheap these days and deeply tied to grain prices. But there's a rumble beneath the surface, like distant thunder behind a cheerful sky. Some of the afflicted girls begin acting differently. Their fits are less dramatic. Their stories wobble under scrutiny. One even tries to retract a few accusations, which goes over like a lead cauldron. See, at this point, it's hard to tell the difference between possession and performance. Are they lying? Are they mentally unwell? Are they simply caught in a cycle they no longer know how to escape? probably some cocktail of all three, and you hear murmurs, little doubts spreading like dandelions, quiet voices at dinner tables, eye rolls in pews. People who once gasped now yawn. The thrill is fading. The public is getting bored. Salem's attention span is shorter than a Puritan hemline is long. You catch wind of a particularly ridiculous trial involving a talking dog. Yes, someone suggests a dog is bewitched. The poor creature is executed. You don't know whether to laugh or scream. Salem, land of the brave, home of the barked at. You remember back to a few months ago when accusations felt dangerous. Now, they just feel pathetic. And then, suddenly, someone powerful speaks up. Increase Mather, a respected minister and father of the colony's president of Harvard, because even in the 1600s, name-dropping mattered, publishes a pamphlet. Its title is long, dramatic, and deeply Puritan. But the core message, it is better that 10 suspected witches should escape than that one innocent person should be condemned. You blink. It's the opposite of everything Judge Stoughton has been doing. This isn't just a sermon, it's a call-out post with leather binding. Mather's words hit different. He questions the use of spectral evidence. He urges caution. He gently suggests that maybe, just maybe, they've been wrong. Governor Phipps, too, is growing uneasy. His own wife's name has been whispered. That tends to make a man rethink things. You see it start to unravel. Trials are paused. Executions halt. Some prisoners are released. The court of Oyer and Terminer is disbanded. Mainstream fact alert. In October 1692, Phipps officially dissolved the special court and prohibited further arrests for witchcraft. A new court, less enthusiastic, less execution-prone, took over, and it began reversing verdicts. But don't cheer too fast. Dozens of people still languish in jail. Many can't afford the fees charged for their own imprisonment. That's right. You had to pay for your chains. Talk about adding insult to iron. And here's a quirky twist. One woman gave birth in jail while awaiting trial. She survived. The baby did too. But she named the baby Deliverance. Because if you're going to survive the Salem witch trials, you might as well make it poetic. You sit on your stoop that night and feel the shift in the air. It's like the storm has passed, but the sky's still gray. The town is quieter, not peaceful, more like everyone's tiptoeing around guilt and leftover panic. But still, for the first time in months, nobody's being hanged tomorrow. And that feels almost like magic. The noose has been tucked away, at least for now. And Gallows Hill lies eerily still. No more dusty processions up its slope. No more last-minute prayers or sniffled goodbyes. You notice it one morning when you step outside. The silence. No hammering of gallows beams. No gossiping over accusations. Just wind in the trees, and maybe a bird that dares sing again. The hysteria has paused, but a pause is not peace. It's October 1692. You glance around the village and sense something is off. Not just the aftermath, but the absence. The courts have closed. The wild-eyed judges have gone quiet. The accusers, those once flailing girls, are keeping a low profile. And a lot of homes now sit empty, their former residents buried, exiled, or still rotting in jail. Still, it's not like the damage is reversible. You can't just wipe away 20 deaths, or unwrangle 100 accusations. The court of Oyer and Terminer is gone, but its stain remains, like candle smoke that clings to every rafter. Governor William Phipps, who's been out on military business most of the summer, returns to a village that's somehow colder despite the fall leaves. His first move? Dissolve the rogue court. His second? Prohibit the use of spectral evidence moving forward. Only visible, provable, earthly evidence counts now. Here's your mainstream fact. In January 1693, Phipps pardoned many of the remaining prisoners, and by May, the last of them were released. But even so, they'd been jailed for months, and some were sick, destitute, or traumatized beyond repair. And speaking of trauma, let's talk about the aftermath. Because now that the pitchforks have been put away, Salem has to look at itself in the mirror, and it doesn't like what it sees. There are funerals, quiet, awkward affairs, often held without proper grave sites, because executed witches weren't allowed Christian burials. Families try to reclaim bodies, sometimes sneaking them back under cover of night. It's morbid, but oddly tender, a stolen dignity. Then come the reparations, or at least the awkward attempts at them. In 1697, the Massachusetts General Court finally declares a day of fasting and soul-searching, like a colonial hour bad. It's not quite justice, but it's the closest thing you'll get to an apology. Most people go along with it, dressed in black, heads bowed, hoping God will forgive the mess they made. You walk by the meeting house on that day of atonement, and even the wind feels like it's trying not to interrupt. Here's your quirky tidbit. The town actually passed a law that all official documents and court records should be purged of witch trial references. A classic case of, let's just pretend this didn't happen. But it's hard to forget when ghosts live next door and your cousin's widow won't meet your eye. Still, historians argue whether this cleanup was about genuine guilt or just a good PR move. Was Salem repenting or just embarrassed? Probably both. The accusers, once treated like royalty, now find themselves the object of side-eyes and whispered judgments. What once passed for holy visions now reads as theater. A few of them quietly leave town. Some go on to marry and live perfectly ordinary lives. Others never really recover. One of the most famous, Ann Putnam Jr., eventually offers a written apology in 1706, standing before the congregation and confessing that I desire to lie in the dust and be humbled for it. She blames the devil for misleading her. That's always a handy scapegoat, especially in Puritan circles. You watch from a pew as she says the words. Some people tear up. Others stare stonily ahead. You can almost hear the inner math. How many deaths was that apology worth? It's not just individuals. The town's very identity is shaken. Ministers are questioned. Church attendance dips. Political factions grow tense. The witch trials weren't just a fluke. They were a rupture. And now everyone's scrambling to stitch things back together. Here's a moment that sticks with you. An old man fixing a fence near the Nurse family property. He pauses, sets down his hammer, and stares into the forest for a long time. I saw Rebecca hang, he says to no one. Then, quieter, I cheered. That's the kind of memory Salem lives with now. Families who lost loved ones petition the government for compensation. A few get small sums, coins in exchange, for kin. Others are ignored. A woman who lost her mother, sister, and niece receives no money at all. Too many dead, not enough silver. Still, the colony seems to realize something important, even if it won't say it aloud. This can't happen again. The law is rewritten. The bar for evidence is raised. Future witchcraft accusations, and yes, they still happen from time to time, are quietly dismissed or laughed off. It's like a collective vow. No more show trials, no more nooses for nightmares. The salvage effort continues into the 18th century. In 1711, the colony finally annuls the guilty verdicts for many of the accused. It's decades late, but symbolically important. It's the government saying, okay, fine, you were right, we messed up, and here's the quirky postscript. Not everyone's name gets cleared. A few victims remain legally guilty for over 300 years, until 2001, when Massachusetts finally exonerates them, which means somewhere in a small, dusty state office, a bureaucrat quietly hit delete on a centuries-old crime. Click, and a witch becomes a citizen again. Back in your village, life begins to resemble normal again. Children play, though their games are quieter. Fields are tended, sermons are preached, but you notice more pauses in conversation, more looks exchanged, and when thunder rumbles, people flinch just a little harder. It's not fear of witches anymore. It's fear of becoming Salem again. By now, you've walked past Gallows Hill so many times, you've memorized the rocks. No marker, no sign, just dirt, scrubby grass, and history buried deeper than bone. You sit there one evening, watching the sun turn the sky the color of ash. A breeze lifts the leaves and stirs something older. You wonder, not for the first time, how many people knew better and said nothing. How many stayed quiet to survive? How many got caught in a lie that grew teeth? And how many still think they were right? The trees don't answer. They just keep standing. Winter creeps into Salem like a quiet apology. The icy wind sneaks under doors, wraps around chimneys, and silences even the most persistent gossip. Snow dusts the ground like powdered sugar over a burnt cake, and everyone seems to walk a little slower, speak a little softer. After months of frenzied accusations and gallows drama, the hush is disorienting, but you know better than to be lulled by it. There's still something unsettled in the air, like a book slammed shut mid-sentence. You can't just hang neighbors, exile families, and execute dogs, and expect the village to snap back to harvest festivals and hymnals. The Puritan belief system, after all, doesn't leave a lot of room for moral do-overs. You either sin and suffer, or you stay in line and hope for salvation. Except, well, no one stayed in line. Not the judges, not the afflicted, and certainly not the colony that let the whole circus spiral. So now, Salem turns inward. The villagers begin to rewrite their narratives. You hear them at church, speaking in hushed tones. I never really believed she was a witch. Or, I told my husband not to vote guilty, but he wouldn't listen. Memory is a malleable thing when your reputation's on the line. Here's your mainstream fact. In the years following the trials, several prominent figures, including Judge Samuel Sewall, publicly confessed their guilt. In 1697, he stood before the congregation, head bowed, while a statement of repentance was read aloud. He fasted every year on the anniversary of the executions for the rest of his life. It's a rare act of accountability, and honestly, a bit uncomfortable to watch, because you can't decide if it's sincere grief or a calculated move to save his name. Either way, it's more than most offer. And while the ministers and judges clean their ledgers, the ordinary people of Salem are left to wrestle with everyday awkwardness. Like, how do you make eye contact with someone whose mother you helped hang? You see it play out over land disputes. Property once owned by accused witches gets passed around like contraband. People fight over fences, crop lines, inheritance claims. The law courts are flooded, not with witchcraft trials now, but with civil suits. Turns out, nothing stokes legal ambition like a few vacant farms and broken families. You walk by the old Proctor property and see it fenced off with fresh wood. Someone new lives there now, but they never quite make eye contact when they fetch water from the well. Speaking of wells, some locals whisper that theirs are cursed, not because of witches this time, but because of guilt. One woman insists her water turned foul the day Sarah Good was hanged. You don't believe her, but you still drink from a different pump, just in case. Here's a quirky tidbit. There's a popular theory that the town's mass hysteria was triggered not by devils, but by rye fungus, specifically Claviceps purpurea, which can cause hallucinations similar to LSD. That's right. Some scholars think the Salem witch trials might have been one long bad trip sponsored by sour bread, but historians still argue whether that theory holds water. Some say the evidence is circumstantial. Others point out the symptoms don't line up quite right. Still, it's poetic. Salem, undone by its daily loaf, as spring inches forward, a strange thing happens. Silence becomes shame. People stop speaking about 1692, not because they've forgotten, but because it's too heavy to carry. Families change the subject when names come up. Children are told vague stories about dark times. You overhear a woman in the market say, "My cousin was involved," and then trail off like the word itself might bite. The Putnams, once among the loudest accusers, now walk with their heads down. Their barn catches fire one night. Accident or message, no one knows. But you can't help smirking when you hear that a local boy carved liar into their fence. Then there's the Paris family. Remember them? Reverend Samuel Paris, the fire and brimstone preacher who fanned this mess into inferno, is now the least popular man in town. Attendance at his sermons plummets. Parishioners avoid him at the market. His own congregation asks him to step down. Eventually, he leaves Salem entirely, tail tucked neatly under his robe. It's a rare win for poetic justice, but not everyone gets closure. You pass Giles Corey's old field, where he was pressed to death. The land's quiet now, but some nights you swear you hear groaning. Just the wind, probably. Or maybe your memory playing tricks again. Either way, it feels like even the ground remembers. In fact, some of the villagers believe the land itself is tainted. Ghost stories begin to circulate. Specters, On Gallows Hill, cold spots near the old jail, shadows darting through the woods. You roll your eyes, but also sleep with a candle lit, just in case. Here's another quirky twist. In the mid 1700s, local children begin daring each other to spend the night near Gallows Hill. The prize? Bragging rights and probably tetanus. No, one lasts till dawn, but here's what you notice most. The shift in how history is remembered. For decades, no one talks about the trials publicly. No plaques, no holidays, no sermons of warning. Salem doesn't memorialize. It compartmentalizes, as if the whole affair could be filed under oops and never opened again. Except, you can't bury guilt that deep, not when it's carved into the town's bones. In quiet moments, you sit near the riverbank, watching water slide over stones. You think about the people you lost, the ones you betrayed, the moments you chose silence over courage, and you wonder, if it all started again, would you do it differently? Or would you nod, stay quiet, and pass the torch along, just like before? Because that's the thing about history. It's not dead. It lives in choices, in whispers, in who you believe, and who you fear. Salem may sleep, but it doesn't forget, and neither do you. The winter hush has given way to early spring's tentative warmth, but in Salem, your stomach still churns at the mention of unconventional medicine. Villagers whisper of cures so bizarre they'd make a modern wellness influencer blush, and most of them involve bodily fluids. It's like the town decided that suffering humiliation twice over, first at the gallows and again in the apothecary, was a fair price for peace of mind. Word spreads of a witch cake recipe that's part folklore, part desperation. You find yourself in a dimly lit kitchen, watching an elderly neighbor paw through a bowl of rye meal, her face pinched in concentration. Nearby, a scrawny dog sniffs impatiently. The recipe calls for the afflicted girl's urine, mixed into dough, then baked into a cake, which is promptly fed to the dog. The theory is that the dog, when it eats the witch's own tainted essence, will reveal the hidden culprit by acting possessed. You swallow as you imagine the process, the sour smell of sweat and fear, the twitching of a poor hound suddenly prancing like it's in a mosh pit. You've heard that when the dog writhes or howls, the finger of suspicion can be pointed at whomever's essence was used. If it does nothing, or God forbid, seems perfectly content, you're in trouble. Either the devil has tricked your test, or you mixed the dough wrong. Here's a mainstream fact. The witch cake test was recommended by Reverend John Hale, a prominent Salem minister who believed the physical essence of the afflicted could lure out a witch. He even supervised a trial run, baking the cake himself to verify the procedure's efficacy and divine sanction. His endorsement gave desperate families the permission they craved to treat witchcraft like a culinary sport. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some versions of the recipe called for the addition of pins, needles, and hairs from the suspected witch's head, almost like a cursed trail mix. If the dog started sewing imaginary seams or scratching uncontrollably, well, case closed. The ritual's gruesome absurdity can't dampen the hope it sparks. A few families swear by it, viewing the dog's performance as incontrovertible proof, because nothing says truth like a canine mid-convulsion. They trot out tavern tales of villagers gleefully identifying witches based on their pets' reactions, celebrating each new arrest with a toast of small beer. But not everyone's convinced. Historians still argue whether the use of witch cakes was widespread enough to matter, or whether it was an odd footnote in a sea of terror. Some scholars claim it happened in only one or two households. Others point to letters describing multiple kitchens fumbling over the recipe. Either way, it speaks volumes about how far people would go to feel in control. Meanwhile, other tests for witchcraft multiply like mold on bread. You hear of one woman whose touch is said to reveal the witch's mark. Villagers line up, offering limbs for inspection. Officials use poking needles to search for the infamous devil's teat, a spot supposedly left on a witch's body where familiars suckled. One overly zealous examiner confuses a birthmark for demonic scarring, and poor Mary Batone is publicly prodded until she screams, proof in their eyes of a sinister pact. You cringe at the memory, Mary, clutching her skirts, tears in her eyes, while the judge scribbles down suspicious mole and calls it conclusive. It's the moment you realize that in Salem, certainty isn't about evidence, it's about narrative. If a crowd believes facts are just decoration, then there's the urine taste test. In some accounts, a magistrate would dip his finger into a cup of afflicted urine and taste it, barely touching his tongue, mind you, to detect traces of malevolence, because nothing seals credibility like lapping a stranger's bodily waste. The sour tang was said to linger, a reminder that evil invades the body and mind. Allegedly, the more bitter it tasted, the stronger the suspected witch's power. You hear gossip that one official mistook sour milk for urine, tasted it, and immediately accused the milkmaid of witchcraft. She nearly lost her head over a spoiled pail of dairy. Historians still argue whether these ordeals were symbolic theater or genuine belief. Some say the councils staged them to bolster public faith in the trials. Others insist these were sincerely held convictions, expressions of the era's medical ignorance and religious fervor. Across town, the sense of moral high ground phrase, when human dignity is kneaded into pastries and bodily fluids are chewed over by dogs, you recognize that no one's spirituality emerges unscathed. The community's hope for proof has become a spectacle of desperation, masked as piety, but rooted in panic. You avoid these gatherings, preferring the relative calm of Gallows Hill at dawn. You wander among the weathered stones, letting cold air wash over you. The tests continue inside homes and courtrooms, while you watch the light shift across the slope, where so many lives were undone by hysteria. It's a reminder. Sometimes the worst trials happen far from courtrooms, in kitchens, around dinner tables, in the dark throes of fear. By now, you know better than to trust a spectacle of proof that requires baking or biting. Yet you wonder, in a place where reason has fled, what other rituals would you resort to if your peace of mind depended on them? Because in Salem, the line between sanity and spectacle is as thin as a dog's whimper. You're trudging through the village market one gray morning when a sudden sharp word cuts through the chill air. A heated debate has erupted near the town square. This time, not about whether a woman's mole marks her as a witch, but about the role of spectral evidence in court. The whispers and murmurs have grown into arguments, and people are taking sides, like the village is divided over a football game. Except the stakes are life or death. You lean in, sensing this is more than just petty gossip. It's a turning point. For months, the courts accepted spectral evidence as the ultimate proof, testimony from those who claimed to see the apparition or spirit of the accused tormenting them. The idea was simple. If your ghost was causing harm, your body must be in league with the devil. But now, doubt creeps in. People are asking, can a spirit lie? Can it be summoned by a jealous neighbor to frame the innocent? Here's your mainstream fact. On October 29th, 1692, the new governor, William Phipps, put an end to the use of spectral evidence in court after pressure from prominent ministers like Increase Mather. Mather famously said, "It were better that 10 suspected witches escape than that one innocent person be condemned." This marks a crucial turning point in the trials. Still, not everyone agrees. Spectral evidence was powerful, invisible, and terrifying. It was like being accused by your own shadow, and for many accusers, it was hard to let go of this weapon. It had been their key to conviction, their shield against suspicion. This sparks your quirky tidbit. Increase Mather, who denounced spectral evidence, was himself a complex figure. He believed in witchcraft, but urged caution in evidence. Legend has it, he wrote his famous warning not because he doubted witches, but because he feared the courts were becoming too bloodthirsty, threatening social order. So, his famous phrase is often paraphrased with a wink. Better 10 witches walk free than one innocent swing. Makes you wonder if he was playing both sides. But here's where the debate gets sticky. Some historians still argue whether removing spectral evidence actually saved lives or merely delayed the inevitable. Convictions under other charges. The trials didn't end because Salem became more rational. It ended because the political winds shifted and enough influential people pushed back against the madness. And let's not forget the human element. You see families torn apart. Those who believed their loved ones were possessed versus those who believed they were scapegoats. The trials weren't just about proving guilt. They were about power, jealousy, and fear wrapped in divine language. The public mood begins to shift from righteous fury to uncomfortable reflection. You overhear a conversation between two women. Did we truly see devils? Or did we see what we feared in our neighbors? It's the kind of question that makes your skin crawl because it holds up a mirror to everyone. Meanwhile, in the courts, the accused start to gain new defenders. Lawyers argue more aggressively, and judges grow cautious. The frenzy wanes, replaced by the dull grind of legal procedure. The once vivid nightmare begins to blur, but the damage is done. You remember the spectral evidence that sent innocent people to the gallows, phantoms and shadows that only some could see. It's a chilling reminder that fear can make ghosts of us all. Outside the courthouse, the townsfolk start to speak openly of their doubts and regrets. Some apologize to families of the accused. Others distance themselves, afraid of being tainted by association. It's as if The very fabric of trust is unraveling. You pass by a young girl who once screamed of invisible attacks. She now sits quietly, staring at the cobblestones, her eyes empty. You wonder if she still sees the spirits, or if she's finally free of them. In the coming weeks, as the trials wind down, you hear rumors that the afflicted girls are no longer tormented by visions. Some say they confessed to fabrications. Others whisper about pressure from families or clergy. The air is heavy with truth and lies tangled together. The story of Salem's trials is less about witches and more about how communities wrestle with fear and evidence, trust and doubt. Removing spectral evidence didn't just change the law, it changed how people saw each other and themselves. You look toward the horizon, feeling the weight of history pressing down, but also the faint stirrings of reason. Salem may be haunted by ghosts, but the living must now find a way to heal. The trials may be slowing, but the town is far from healed. You wander Salem's streets, noticing subtle shifts. The once lively gatherings of accusers and sympathizers dissolve into hushed conversations and sideways glances. The mood is heavy with exhaustion and a collective craving for normalcy, yet normal feels forever out of reach. The victims, those who escaped execution but were imprisoned, are now pawns in a delicate dance between justice and mercy. You hear stories of families petitioning for their release, offering goods or land in exchange for freedom. It's a strange market of forgiveness, where the price is human suffering. Here's your mainstream fact. By mid-1693, the Massachusetts General Court began to pardon many of the accused who remained imprisoned, recognizing the shaky foundations of the trials. This act didn't erase the trauma, but marked the beginning of legal closure. Still, the aftershocks ripple through every home. Families struggle to reclaim lost land, while some accuse neighbors of profiting from witchcraft's ruin. Accused, witches' children face stigma, whispered about as if wickedness were hereditary. The social fabric frays in unexpected ways. You overhear a woman lamenting, "My husband's cousin will not speak to me. His father said I am cursed by association." You nod knowingly. The invisible scars of Salem extend beyond the scaffold. A quirky tidbit emerges. A few years later, some of the afflicted girls married into prominent families, living quiet lives, while the community pretended their dark pasts never happened. One former accuser became a respected townswoman who reportedly never spoke publicly about the trials. Again, it's almost as if silence was the town's preferred spell for forgetting. But the collective amnesia isn't universal. Some townsfolk keep private journals filled with bitterness and sorrow. One such diary, discovered centuries later, reveals a woman's anguish over losing her husband to the gallows, balanced by fear of speaking out lest she become a target herself. And historians still argue whether the social consequences of the Salem witch trials extended beyond Salem proper, influencing attitudes toward witchcraft and justice in other colonies. Some see Salem as a warning tale, while others argue it was a localized catastrophe, quickly buried under new political agendas. Meanwhile, religious leaders grapple with their roles. Reverend Parris's forced resignation symbolizes the church's recognition of its complicity, but many ministers cling to belief in witches, albeit with newfound caution. The Puritan community's faith remains intact, though tempered by the bitter taste of error. You reflect on how the trials exposed a deeper crisis, not just fear of witches, but fear of chaos itself. The strict social order was cracking, and witchcraft accusations were a way to patch the cracks. But the patch was fragile, prone to tear under pressure. You pause near the old meeting house, imagining the voices that once echoed through its walls, the fervent sermons, the pleading cries, the decrees of death. Now, silence fills the space, heavy with memories, too painful to recall. In the end, the Salem witch trials are a mirror, reflecting humanity's struggle with fear, power, and truth. You walk away, heart heavy but hopeful, knowing that history's lessons are never truly finished. The seasons turn again, and you find yourself outside the prison where so many accused witches were held. The stone walls are cold and unforgiving, a stark reminder of the thin line between freedom and despair. The air smells faintly of damp, earth, and old wood, a scent that clings stubbornly to your clothes, as if the building itself holds onto the sorrow inside. You imagine the prisoners within, huddled against the chill, waiting for judgment or release. Their whispered prayers mix with the creaking of chains and the distant murmur of voices. It's hard to fathom the loneliness that clings to these walls, a silence punctuated by the occasional sob or sigh. One mainstream fact that stands out: the Salem jail was notoriously overcrowded and unsanitary, contributing to illness among the prisoners. Some died behind bars, forgotten by a town too busy with accusations to tend to their suffering. A quirky tidbit you hear from an old guard involves a cat who supposedly roamed the prison halls, earning the nickname Black Salem. Legend is the cat was a comforting presence to the inmates, sometimes seen perched beside a weeping prisoner or curling up in the sunlight that filtered through barred windows. Some whispered the cat was a familiar spirit in its own right, though whether for good or ill was up for debate. The debate about how much of the suffering was due to the physical conditions versus the psychological terror still echoes today. Historians still argue whether the prison conditions directly contributed to the breakdown of some accused witches' mental health, or if the weight of the accusations alone was enough to shatter them. You think about the paradox of justice here. A system designed to protect order instead becomes a crucible of chaos. The accused, shackled not just in body, but in reputation, face an invisible prison that lasts far beyond their release. You pass a carved inscription above the jail's door, barely visible now: "Fear God and honor the King." It strikes you as grim irony, given the kingdom of fear the trials created. Outside, townsfolk whisper about lingering curses and restless spirits. Some swear they've seen shadows flit past prison windows at night or heard faint cries carried on the wind. Whether superstition or guilt, these stories add layers to Salem's haunted legacy. In a quieter moment, you ponder how the jail symbolizes the community's failure. It's not just a building of stone, but a monument to hysteria's price, a place where suspicion and fear were locked in alongside flesh and bone. You leave the prison behind, the air feeling lighter as you step into the sunlight, but the memory lingers. a reminder that true freedom means more than release from chains. It demands reckoning with the past and compassion for those who suffered unjustly. The days grow longer now, and as you wander back through Salem's winding lanes, you notice how the scars of the witch trials have begun to settle into the town's fabric, like an old bruise, fading but never quite gone. The buildings stand, the markets bustle, but beneath the surface, a quiet unease lingers, as if the earth itself remembers what transpired. You catch whispers of efforts toward restitution and apology, a rare and fragile hope sprouting amid the ashes of fear. Families of the condemned seek compensation for their losses, but the process is slow and tangled in legal red tape and stubborn pride. A mainstream fact here is that decades later, in 1711, the Massachusetts government officially reversed the convictions of many accused witches and granted financial restitution to some of their descendants. It was a formal acknowledgement that the trials were a miscarriage of justice, though the damage had long been done. Among the more curious stories, you hear of a young woman who bravely petitions the court, insisting on her family's innocence. She speaks with quiet resolve, her voice trembling but clear, a stark contrast to the hysteria of years before. She becomes a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even in darkness, hope finds a way. There's also a quirky tidbit. One of the petitioners is said to have dressed in black satin for the hearings, a sharp and unexpected choice that startled the court and spectators alike. Some speculate it was a subtle act of defiance, a way to reclaim dignity lost in the trials. Others say she simply liked the fabric. As you observe, it's clear that the process of healing is uneven. Some families accept restitution and move on. Others harbor bitterness and suspicion. The trial's legacy weaves into Salem's identity, complicating how the town remembers itself. Historians still argue whether these early reparations truly helped the community heal, or merely papered over deeper wounds. Some scholars suggest the money was a symbolic gesture that failed to address the trauma and social divisions left behind. You stroll past the meeting house, where sermons once raged against witches. Now, the preacher speaks of forgiveness and grace, though the echoes of fear still seem to ripple beneath his words. The community's faith endures, transformed by humility and the painful lessons of the past. As evening falls, you pause by the town square. The lamps cast soft pools of light, and the chatter of townsfolk blends with the rustling leaves. The air carries a subtle promise that even the darkest chapters can lead to new beginnings. You realize that Salem's story is not just one of terror, but of resilience and the slow, difficult path toward understanding. It's a reminder that history isn't just what happened. It's how we choose to remember, reckon, and rebuild. And as you watch the stars emerge, you feel the weight of those lessons settling gently into your mind, a quiet comfort for the night ahead. The chill of early evening settles over Salem, and you find yourself at the edge of the forest that skirts the town, a place both feared and revered. It's here, beyond the hearth and stone walls, that whispers of witchcraft and the unknown mingle with the rustling leaves and shadows. You take a slow breath, smelling the damp earth and pine, grounding yourself in the wild that seemed to fuel so many of Salem's fears. The woods were a borderland, a place where reason often lost its grip and imagination ran free. Perfect breeding ground for suspicion. You remember the stories of accused witches who were said to consort with spirits in these very woods, dancing under moonlight or communing with familiars. Yet, the truth was often less dramatic. Many were simply women who spent time gathering herbs, healing neighbors, or living apart from strict societal norms. Here's a mainstream fact. Many accused witches had knowledge of folk medicine, which often included the use of herbs like wormwood, mandrake, and belladonna, plants misunderstood by their fearful neighbors as tools of dark magic. The quirky tidbit: some accused witches reportedly left behind secret spell books that were more like herbal guides or household remedies, scribbled with recipes for salves and potions to treat common ailments. These notebooks were sometimes mistaken for grimoires, adding fuel to the fire of suspicion. But there's another layer. You've heard that some of the accused were midwives or healers, roles that granted them a kind of authority and independence unusual for women of the time. This independence threatened the rigid patriarchal order, making them easy targets when fear needed a scapegoat. Historians still argue whether witchcraft accusations were driven more by superstition or by social and economic factors, like jealousy, property disputes, or challenges to male authority. Some suggest that fear of women's growing roles in healthcare and community life sparked the panic as much as any spectral vision. Walking among the trees, you realize the forest itself becomes a metaphor, a place of mystery where light and shadow play tricks, and where the unknown breeds both wonder and dread. The boundary between natural healing and perceived witchcraft was thin, and crossing it could mean death. You think about how, even now, knowledge can be dangerous in the wrong hands or the wrong context. As you exit the woods, you carry with you a sense of the complexity beneath the hysteria. The Salem witch trials weren't just about witches or devils. They were about control, fear of the other, and the power struggles hidden beneath everyday life. Tonight, the forest feels quiet and watchful, a witness to history's tangled dance of belief and doubt. You're back in the heart of Salem, the dawn's early light washing over the town like a soft promise of peace after a long, troubled night. The streets, once filled with chaos and accusations, now carry a quieter rhythm, a tentative truce with the past. But the echoes of the trials still hum faintly beneath the surface, like a distant storm that shaped the landscape forever. You reflect on how the story you've walked through tonight was never just about witches or superstition. It was about people, flawed, fearful, sometimes cruel, but also capable of great resilience and reflection. Salem was a crucible where the darkest fears were played out, but also a place where a community began the painful work of healing. The mainstream fact that lingers here is the legacy of the trials in American legal history. The hysteria helped spark changes in how courts handle evidence and due process. The phrase, innocent until proven guilty, and skepticism toward spectral evidence became pillars of justice, shaped in no small part by the errors of Salem. And here's a quirky tidbit to mull over as you prepare to rest. Centuries later, Salem embraced its witchy reputation in a very different way. By the 20th century, it transformed into a tourist hub, complete with witch museums, quirky shops selling magic potions, and Halloween festivals that celebrate what once was a tragedy. It's as if the town decided to own its story, turning darkness into a kind of charm. Yet the historians still argue whether the trial's biggest lesson is about the dangers of mass hysteria or the resilience of justice. Some say Salem teaches us to guard against fear-driven judgment. Others say it's a reminder of the complexity of social dynamics in times of crisis. Both truths swirl together, just like the mists that often settle over the harbor. As you settle in, the shadows of the past feel less threatening, softened by understanding and time. You imagine the faces of those accused, not monsters or villains, but neighbors caught in a storm they couldn't control. Now, the night is yours to claim. The history you've traced tonight is heavy but honest, a tapestry woven with fear and hope, darkness and light. As you close your eyes, let the story drift away gently, like a candle's last flicker or the soft rustle of autumn leaves. Remember that even the most unsettling tales can hold comfort if we let them remind us how far we've come. Sweet dreams, and stay safe, my fellow.